I'm so excited, and I can already see in the comments that a lot of people are really excited too about today's webinar. Um, in case you don't know, I am Koos Kuna. I am the co-founder of Sketchbook School. I do not teach in the course Mixed Media Journaling because I'm not an expert at all. I'm a student in this course, just like all of you, and I am honored to actually do a Q&A live session with Seth today. So let's bring him on screen right away. There you are. Hi, Seth.
Hey Kosha, hey everybody. How you doing?
I am really good. I'm very excited about the past 2 weeks actually, and about your week. I learned so much. How do you feel about this whole endeavor?
It's been really exciting for me. I think primarily because of the community. I've been trying to be really active in there, and the group who is working on these classes to me are amazing. They're all really willing. They're so passionate and they're so quick. That almost before the class went up, people had done their first pages. It was incredible, and it's just been really exciting to see how people have responded to Mary Beth and to
Yeah.
myself and the differences. Yeah, it's been beyond anything I could have imagined.
I think it's really great that you are so active in the schoolyard too. I mean, that really adds a lot of value and fun to the course. And you've actually been answering a lot of questions already in the schoolyard. Um,
Yeah, there may not be any left.
no, that's
Okay.
not true. I have collected a lot. People have been asking some questions in advance, and just if you have any questions for Seth, you can put those here in the comments. But please first put the word question in there with all capital letters, so I can find the questions. Otherwise, it'll just dissolve in all the other fun comments going on here on the sidebar. So also, before we dive into all the questions, we do have a giveaway. And I believe that's a signed book by you, Seth, and a set of stamps by you. So I
Yeah, that's
actually
correct.
have, let's see, this is the prize. Yes, it looks amazing. The Pulse of Mixed Media. And it will be signed and sent to the winner, but we will announce the winner by the end of this webinar. So just hold on to your horses. Morgan will take a name from the hat, and that will be the winner who we will announce later. So, are you ready for some questions? I think there's a lot of art tools, materials questions, but there may be other stuff too, because
Okay.
to me, this whole, it's very new to me, mixed media journaling. And to me, the whole process is, at first, I thought it's all about material. But then suddenly I realized, especially with your week, that sometimes less is more. And you need to understand, like, when you're done, or something like that.
Mm.
I don't know. It's really a feeling. You really need to follow your
Yes.
intuition,
Yeah, I
and
agree with that
yeah.
100%.
So I hope
Yeah,
that some more people have that same experience, and maybe there are some questions around that too.
sure.
Yeah, so let's start with the first question from the schoolyard. I just sort of copy pasted them here. So this is a question from Karen. Let me pull this away so I can actually read it myself. Karen says, well, she has three questions. First,
Okay.
first question is, do you use the same process for larger artwork? Let's just do it
Okay.
one by one.
Should we start with that?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm gonna say yes and no. Um, Pretty much every piece of art I make, no matter whether it's a journal or on a panel or an assemblage, I never know what I'm gonna make. So that's true. I never have an image in my mind. Whenever I do, in the past anyway, it was always an epic fail because something happened along the way that led me to a different direction. And if I was wedded to the end point, it just wouldn't work. So with my larger pieces, I do enter that way, but I usually have a little bit of a stronger direction in general. So for example, I might have an image or a word or a collage piece or a metal found object, something that is the starting point, and I build around that. And I think also in terms of the other difference is there's less emotion in the work. Typically, I mean, sometimes it could be very potent or passionate or powerful in the end, but I don't necessarily go in with, if I'm feeling angry, I make an angry piece of art. That's really more just for the journaling.
Right. Okay, that's very clear. So her second question is that, well, she says, I tried to find chalk acrylic, but can't find it in my country. Can you share the brand you used?
Sure. This will be, I guess, a little bit of shameless self-promotion too. I apologize in advance. So the brand I use is a brand called Paper Artsy.
Yep.
And Paper Artsy, it's a chalk-based acrylic paint. And they are actually a UK-based company.
Okay.
I'm sort of lucky to work with the company. So of their gazillion colors, currently 20 of them are my own that I've mixed, that I put out.
Wow.
So if you're interested in my 20 colors, you could come to my website, and it's sethapter.com, and I have a shop where you can get them directly. If you want to see the entire range of colors, you can go to Paper Artsy. Just Google Paper Artsy. And there's a list of stockists all over the world, in person and online, that they can get it. And just as a quick aside, the reason why I really like that paint and chalk paint in general is when I'm working in a book, if I'm using the chalk paint, the pages don't stick together. Yeah. Which is a huge problem. Sometimes with other paints. Pretty much any pen will write over it. I've never ruined a pen over Paper Artsy paint. I don't think I mentioned this in the class, but because it's a chalk-based acrylic, it actually is almost like gesso. So you don't necessarily even have to gesso your page because you're using the chalk acrylics. And then lastly, it dries really, really fast. And when you're working in layers, the faster it dries, the quicker you can work. And I think everybody knows now I like to work fast.
Yeah. That's something. That's the first thing that like you can see happening. Like, whoa, what's going on here? Yeah, but I like that. I like that quick pace, like just moving on. Yeah, following your
stops
guts.
you from thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So third question from Karen, and also I just mentioned those the brand and Seth Apter's website in the comments. So
thank you.
Go find it. How do you stop the elements from lifting off your page once dry? Do you seal it?
Okay. I like to say that I'm a very patient person, but I'm a really impatient artist. So sealing something that's just for me just never happens. If it's a journal and the journals are for me, if I'm just creating some pieces for myself, I never bother to take the time to seal it. I figure if something happens along the way, I just go with it. If something falls off the page after, that's just meant to happen. It's just not something I worry about or deal with. If I were to seal it, I know I always talk about using spray fixatives, but honest to God truth, I've never used a spray fixative. I tend to seal my work with matte medium. Right. When I do seal it.
Okay.
Which can be a little tricky though, because if you're using water soluble materials and you put a layer of wet matte medium, they'll smear. Yeah. So what I usually do is I let those elements dry for a matter of days, and usually after a number of days, what is a non-permanent material actually pretty much is permanent. I've noticed that with stamp pad ink. That after a few days you can just go over it and it won't smear. It won't run. So also it's
basically just a matter of experimenting with it, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next question from Kat. She says, can you use diluted gesso in place of matte medium?
Okay, I'm going to say no. Even though the two elements look the same, kind of, they're both typically white. The matte medium, when it dries, it always dries clear. And gesso, when gesso dries, it always dries opaque. So if you were to water down gesso, which a lot of artists actually do for different effects, it would still completely cover your piece. So unless you want that to happen, I would recommend you don't do that.
Right. Okay, good. That is very clear. Nancy is asking about your artwork. What substrate or substrates do you use for the pieces that you sell? Do you ever reproduce journal pages to sell, or sell the journal pages, or sell the journal pages themselves? Those are two different questions, I think.
Okay. Okay, the first one, probably outside of journals, I actually do make a lot of handmade books that I don't really consider journals. I consider them more artist books. And again, the difference is the whole emotion, personal issue.
Yeah.
So I'm often working on paper and binding it in a book. I work on paper quite a lot, usually heavy watercolor paper. And then I also work on wood panels. I love working on wood panels. One of the things I do with some of my art is use found objects and kind of metal and wood embellishments, and a sturdy wood cradled panel works really well. I actually don't really like canvas, so I don't work on canvas too often. When you're working on a canvas and it's cradled, it sort of gives in the middle, and so although you can kind of stitch through it, which is fun, and I don't like the give. I like the sturdiness of the wood.
Right.
And then the other thing is I do sort of these wonky, odd pieces. So sometimes I create a lot of things in vintage metal tins, old jar covers, things like that for my assemblage art.
Yes, yeah.
And the second question, I don't reproduce my journals. I have been in a few books that other artists have created that are about journal pages, where they've chosen some of my pages and they've reproduced them in their book. It's a handful of my pages at most. And I did have a momentary lapse of sanity a while ago, where I just felt, for whatever reason, I needed to tear up a journal. So I actually did take a journal and tear out all the pages, and I do think I still have a few of those left that, maybe potentially I'd move on and sell, but that's not something I typically do.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Well, I didn't tear them up in a million pieces.
No. Yeah. But still, it's quite radical. I mean, yeah.
I don't know. I always go with my gut, and that was what happened.
You got to do what you got to do.
Exactly.
It's true. Okay, well, that first part of that question actually also, or answer, actually also answers the question from Christina Baker here on YouTube. She says, she asked actually about canvas boards or panels for your larger work, but it's panels, yeah. So good to know. Let's see. Did we ask? Yeah, that was Nancy. Arlene Arlene has 3 questions.
Okay. It's the magic number.
Yeah, it's true. That's what you mentioned. That's what you get now.
In art, right.
Okay. So first question, you talked about dye versus solvent, but what about pigment inks or pads?
Okay, so pigment. If you're using ink pads, here's like a 1.5 minute lesson on that.
Oh, okay.
Dye ink pads are not permanent, and they're water soluble. So if you're using a dye ink pad, they move and they blend. And if you layer something with dye ink pads and then say splat it with water, you'll get the splats showing up. So it's really an exciting and a fun tool. You just need to know that if you really want something permanent with no chance of moving, dye is not the way to go.
Right.
Pigment is actually quite similar. Pigment ink is a very wet ink, like the dye ink. And pigment ink is probably the ink that stays wet the longest. So with pigment ink, you can often get a very, very, very opaque impression of the stamp. So you can actually get a great looking stamp on there. Mm-hmm. But if you just even like touch it, like with your sleeve, your loose sleeve, because it stays wet so long, it will smudge. Right. So if you want something, maybe choose a pigment for your last focal point that's at the very top, and then just put the art away for a while. The solvent-based inks, they're permanent and they dry very, very fast. So I do like those because I know once it's on, it'll stay on, and also I can move quickly because it's going to dry. The other important difference is that most solvent inks, there's not that many, but most of them work on almost all surfaces. So if I want to stamp on metal or wood or glass or plexi, that kind of thing, it's a solvent ink, whereas a dye ink, it's never going to dry on that surface. It just doesn't get absorbed. So you can, literally wipe it away. Right. So those are probably, I think that answers it.
Very much, yes. Very clear. Absolutely.
But as you mentioned earlier with something else, experiment.
Yeah.
Just play.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it, to just, especially the stuff that you have already, just experiment with that and see what you can do with it and what you like and what you don't like. I'm also like, discovering all kinds of things.
Sure. Everybody ends up with a favorite.
Yeah, stuff that it's just on my shelf. I'm like, oh, wait. I can use this. Yeah, exactly. And yesterday when I was actually doing my homework along with my mother-in-law, I used all of her stuff, and that was so great because it was like
new.
Everything was new, and it was like she is a collector, so she had like wrappings of biscuits, whatever, and I was like, oh, nice. This is so awesome, so treasures.
She'd fit right in here.
Absolutely. Yeah. She is an absolute mixed media artist, So Raja has a quick, short question, and that is, can gesso become too old to use, and what are the signs that it's not working? Can it dry out question. Or something?
It might. Well, certainly if you don't cap gesso, like pretty much any of the other mediums, that it can dry out. I've never seen gesso get moldy, and I don't know that it could, but I have seen some products kind of get moldy over time. But again, that's usually if they're not capped and there's air. I think it's mostly the dry that it could dry out. Yeah. The other thing to note, though, is gesso is, depending upon the brand you use, it's very variable. So you can have gesso that's very thin. So, for example, my favorite brand is Liquitex, the artist grade. And if I turn that upside down, it would just pour right out. Right. Whereas, for example, the golden gesso, which a lot of people like, if you turn it upside down, it's thick. It won't even pour out. It's more like a
gel kind of.
It's more like a thick paste and gel.
Yeah.
And so, that it's thick or thin, which sometimes people think, if it's too thick, maybe there's something wrong. Some of the thick gessos are that way to begin with. And then the other thing I don't think I talked much about is gesso, just as an aside, gesso comes in other flavors too, so to speak. So, white is traditional, but you can easily find gesso in black. Yeah. Which I use a lot. There's clear gesso. And then some of the craft companies, and maybe a few of art companies, also have metallic colors. Like I think Mary Beth used gold gesso. She loves her gold gesso.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I went a little bit overboard with my gold last week, but once you have it, you have to use it, right? It's so shiny. Sure. Okay, great answer. Thanks. So Bonnie also has a question about matte medium. She says, I used acrylic matte medium to attach and layer my pieces on 140 whatever visual journal.
Pounds, okay.
Yeah, thank you. But the pages develop waves. So she tried to keep it under weights, but the bumps, the thing just won't lay flat. Do you have any tips?
Sure. I'm not sure if it was the watercolor paper or if it was the individual elements. So I'll talk about both of them. Um, Paper is fibrous, so anytime it gets wet, you're going to see it curl,
Yeah.
and you potentially can see a wave. And it has a grain, it has a direction. So all that kind of matters, but that's sort of technical. Basically, the way I deal with that is if I wet one side of the paper, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the other. So sometimes when I start a journal page, if I'm starting with gesso, I'll gesso one side, I'll let it dry, and then before I work on that side, I'll turn it over and I'll gesso the other side. And there's something about the fact that it's wet on both sides that somehow often flattens it.
Right.
If you're finding that you have individual waves or bumps, like if you take a piece of newspaper or collage paper, and you're using something that wet, often it can kind of bubble and get bumpy. So I try to do a couple things. One is, I think you saw that in the video, I used a paper towel.
Yeah.
To kind of wipe it down and do that. So part of that is kind of pressing it out. I've seen people I don't do this much, but take a bone folder and really push out the glue and press it down, the collage element, so that it's flat and it doesn't bubble. And then the other thing is, if it's a massive, like a really huge disruptive thing, then I'll wait till it dries and I'll take just a craft knife and after it's dry, I'll just split it right where the bubble is. And then I just get a little extra glue and I press it down and press it in.
Right.
And then sometimes I actually go with the waves and bumps. If they're barely there, it's,
right.
like we always say, texture.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're eating and you drop your food in there, you just say, well, texture. Anything. So the brush, the fibers from the brush fall in there. It's texture.
Exactly.
It's we get away with it.
That's exactly how it was intended to be. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, one tip not to do, because that's also something I learned yesterday from my mother-in-law when we were doing our homework together. She showed me a piece that she did on a loose piece of paper, and she said it was curling and it was bubbling, so I just ironed it. But she used acrylic paint, so that started to bubble, right? She was like, I shouldn't do that anymore.
That could also stick to your iron. So,
yeah. I think she used a piece of paper between.
Wax paper.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. That's the trick.
And I was like, you shouldn't have told me. I thought it was totally, intended. Like,
exactly,
texture.
Right. It's the look.
Yeah.
People should sort of know that acrylic paint its base is polymer emulsion.
Yeah.
And what that basically means is it's plastic.
Yeah.
It's kind of plasticky. So, you heat plastic and plastic melts.
It melts, exactly. Yeah. So be careful with those tricks.
Yeah. Don't do this at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Barb has a question. She wants to make a piece to give to her daughter, and she says yes, and she says, would I do that on a piece of paper, or is there a better way?
It's just personal preference.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I work on paper often.
Yeah.
Paper's nice. It's lightweight. It's easily displayable. You can lean it on something on a bookcase. You can hang it up. With mixed media, I don't often frame things, so to me they just stand as they are. It's probably, I don't know if you're just starting out, but if you're just starting out, it's probably the best thing to do. The other thing I'll say is that sometimes when I work on paper that's a little flimsy, what I'll do is people might have heard of bookboard. Bookboard is the board that you use to actually make traditional books, hardcover books. Sometimes people call it chipboard. It's basically cardboard. So like the back of an old school pad. Mm-hmm. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll then glue and mount the paper onto the bookboard so that even though it's still paper, it has a sturdiness to it that that sort of makes it a little bit more easily displayed.
That's smart. That's really
Yeah.
smart. Yeah. Well, that definitely will answer Barb's question.
Okay.
So Jane says, where do you find art rub-ons? All I ever seem to see, other than the Tim Holtz line, are sentiments or figures, and yours did appear to be like those. Not sure what she
Okay.
means, but yeah.
Well, rub-ons are traditionally a craft product, and I know that there are sort of artists out there who shy away from craft products. I'm a believer in anything works and anything goes, and just because it's from the craft industry, which I'm actually a big part of, that's not like a fine artist shouldn't avoid it. So rub-ons historically you'd find in a craft shop. The thing is that over the years people just like to use them less, and some rub-ons don't work very well. So over time they are harder and harder to find. Tim Holtz has 1 million of them. His are very good quality. So if you do find some of his that you like, I would definitely recommend that you buy it. What I do is, the ones I used in the video, and what I do is I order them from Japan. Japan is a huge place for paper arts, and also the style is often different than what you get in the United States companies. So like washi tape, which is so popular and which I used a lot, that's obviously, it's washi. It's originally Japanese. So I'm going to throw out there again, if you do go to my shop, I've got, I don't know, maybe 18, maybe more patterns of these rub-ons that are all very abstract and colorful and a little different than what you typically find. So you're more than welcome to look there if you want.
Yep. Putting it out there in the comments.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so Jane can find her way to some fun rub-ons. Good. Valerie loves the organic feel of integrating willow charcoal into the final layers. What would be the best way to seal the piece, since matte fluid or gel medium smears the charcoal? Perhaps spray or something else?
Yeah, again, normally I would never say to anybody, do this, because it'll work, if I haven't done it.
Yeah.
Because like I said earlier, I haven't used spray, but I would, from what I know from everybody else who does, you would definitely use spray fixative for that.
Yeah.
I would definitely go in that direction.
Yeah.
And I wish I could recommend a brand, but I can't. But I'm sure there's people in the school maybe who use it. Maybe you can put comments in the YouTube video if you have a good one that you like.
Yeah, that's a good one. Please put in the comments. And I sometimes people say, oh, you can just use hairspray, but I wouldn't recommend that, because that can actually really change the color of your work over time.
Okay.
So that's something, that's what I know.
Sure.
But
you can obviously tell that I have no experience with hairspray, so I can't help.
Or maybe you have, and this is what happens.
Oh yeah, voila.
Yeah. Okay, so Jody says, I think this is a really interesting question. We're moving on to a little bit of a different realm. She says, do you think being in a mood makes better art, or is it just about making art no matter your mood? I only seem to be creative when I'm happy. She loves your style and she loved watching your class.
Well, thank you. I think that as an artist, it's important to show up no matter how you feel. It's very easy to get into what I think is not a great art habit or practice, to only go and create when you're inspired. Because, who knows when and if you'll be inspired, and people go through these long periods of time where they're not inspired. So for me, you just need to show up and you need to create. And for me, the way I do it is I just start, like I showed you. Like, I just get something down, and then that takes me somewhere. I think that the times, I don't know that I wouldn't say I make better art or less good art depending upon my mood, but it definitely is different. And I think that's definitely true in the journal, especially, where I have darker pages or brighter pages. And I definitely think it reflects my mood. But I would say, even when you're not happy, or especially when you're not happy, maybe that's the time to go work in your journal and see what happens.
Yeah. Agreed. Good. Okay. I think I still have a few questions from, I'll just move on because otherwise I'll get confused. From the schoolyard, just a few more questions. So here's a question from Larissa. She says, I'm going to be traveling, and I think Susanna actually has a little bit of the same question. I'm going to be traveling and I want to make up a materials kit to take, but I can't read it because it's too small and things are in the way, sorry. I always get stuck on which items to take. I'm only going to take a small pencil case full, so I can do some pages while I'm away. Do you have any suggestions?
Sure. I do that as well. I pack something to take. The first thing I'm going to say is an aside. I think it's on Mary Beth Shaw's Facebook page, but she actually just did a live video, walking you through her kit, and she showed you her the containers and what she brought. She literally took it out, so I would definitely watch that.
Yeah, she showed something during a live Q&A last week as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good recommendation.
That could be helpful for me. It depending on what I'm doing and where I'm going. So I travel a lot to teach. Like right now, I'm in a hotel room in Florida because I'm teaching here this weekend. Then I'm bringing all my supplies for the class. So for me, my kit is 2 suitcases filled. I don't think that's probably what you're talking about, though. So what I tend to do is I tend to bring segments of materials only. So I actually don't often, when I travel, bring my paint. So I got my journal here. This is my current journal, which I showed some pages in the video, but it wasn't in the walkthrough. So I just started these pages at home, just the way that I always start my pages, with just smashing papers and layering things. So what I'll do is I'll bring this journal, and then I'll bring some stamps and maybe ink pads. I'll bring a lot of pens and pencils. Maybe I'll bring a few rub-ons, maybe a little bit of collage, so that I then take it to the next step. So this one I did recently while I was traveling. This is, I think, some tissue or deli paper that I laid over it. And then I just took my white journaling pen and made those dots. And in this one, I brought a little bit of collage material and I collaged on it, and then I rubbed some ink over it. So for me, I try to be pretty succinct. Maybe I'll bring a scissors, maybe, because I'm always checking luggage anyway.
Yeah.
And ink pads, but I don't bring the brushes and all that stuff. Maybe I'd bring a water brush and some watercolors.
Right.
That's really convenient and easy to throw in as well.
Right.
And of course, I bring my journal.
Yes,
don't forget that.
That's very, very important. And that's actually also part of her question. Is there a particular brand or journal type you use as your base?
I'm going to say no, because pretty much I don't think I've ever used the same journal twice. For some reason, every time I move to another journal, I like to get a whole different feel to it. Yeah. So my current journal and my last journal, they're both Strathmore brands. They're 140-pound watercolor paper, because I do like it a little sturdier. This one is traditional bound. The last one was a ring bound, spiral bound. Yeah. And larger. Mostly I work larger than this. This one's quite small for me as a journal. But I also often make my own journals. And sometimes what I like to do is I like to just bring watercolor paper, and then I bring loose sheets and I journal on those. And then at some point I go home and I'll I'll bind them myself. I'll just do my own binding,
Right.
so that I'm not working literally in a book, but they end up in a book.
Exactly.
And then that's, again, homemade.
That's really great. Yeah. So Susanna, I think she had a similar question, but I don't want to just skip it. Let me see. She said, you mentioned working in your mixed media journal while waiting in a restaurant. She says,
yeah.
I'm laughing at the thought of you in the zone making a hot mess with papers, medium, and paint as the waiter arrives with your food. So what kinds of materials do you actually bring? Well, I think that's, but I just really liked how she was actually envisioning that whole, adventure there.
I might imagine that scene too.
Yeah.
No, that's when I'll bring, like, say my journal pens or pencils.
Right.
And work over. So it's really compact. It's, it's sort of easy to, quickly put away if I have to. And for me, I could spend hours going back to a page and mark make. It's just one of my favorite things. So, I just always try to have that with me. I'm in New York City, so there are often lines, and it's not typical that I'm gonna, be in line in the post office and journal while I'm standing, but there are just times when you're waiting. And if I'm sitting and it's comfortable, then I'll just break out the journal and the pen. And it also stops me from being frustrated about the wait.
It's your way of meditation.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
It's fantastic. Yeah. It's totally zen. Love it. So here's one last one from the schoolyard. Linda says, how did you create the clear overlay page of the clock in your journal? Do you know what she's talking about?
I do.
Okay.
I would love to take credit for creating that, but that was also a craft find. So if you go to any craft store, they're going to have 12-inch by 12-inch scrapbook paper. That's not as scrapbooking isn't as popular as it used to be, but there's a lot of diehards. And so in the scrapbook section, you can often find these vellum overlays that have designs on them. And just over the years, I've gathered, it's a good thing that I spend a lot of time teaching, because often the teaching takes place in a shop. And so I'm constantly going to different shops. And whenever I'm there, I always look for things, which is dangerous, but, but fun. And so that was just an overlay, a 12 by 12 that I cut to fit the page.
Excellent.
Although I will tell you that there are, I'm going to blank on it. They're not vellum, but there are these sheets that are clear. Maybe somebody can help me with my words, that you can put through a printer and print on it.
Oh.
I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about.
The acetate kind of?
Yeah, like an acetate sheet.
Yeah.
Some will takes the heat from a printer. And so you can also do scan your own drawings or take an, sort of copyright free kind of thing, and you could print it out yourself and make your own. And I have done that. I do that sometimes with my photographs. I like to take photographs of graffiti and sort of old walls and things like that.
Right.
And then sometimes I'll print them out on these acetate sheets so that I can layer over my own photography.
Right.
But you can still see through what's underneath.
Excellent. And the comments are trickling in. People are saying is acetate, Spectrafix, inkjet acetate, Duralar. I don't know what.
Duralar, sure. That's something. Mary Beth
Duralar mixed media sheets. Yeah, transfer sheets, overheads, Yupo paper, transparencies. Well, there's enough there.
This is the perfect example of what I love about this group. This is honestly, I'm all about community, and it's you go to a lot of these online classes and there's a community, but they're not like this.
It's very immediate,
also
right?
Active. You're also generous. It's crazy. It's just amazing, and this is the perfect example where you ask a question, you all come to the rescue.
Isn't it great? I love it.
Yeah.
And then there's more. I mean, Celia says, or you can get printed rice paper that's partly transparent. So there's also really great ideas in there too.
Yeah.
And you can print on tissue if attached to a carrier sheet as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Great, great, great ideas. Okay, so I want to move over to, I have to scroll back quite a bit for the questions here in the comments. Here's an interesting question from Charlotte. She says, as a psychologist, what do you think holds people back from actually creating? I'm a great collector of art stuff, have yet to finish anything I've done in your classes and other classes.
Okay. That's a good question, and I think it could be a lot of things, but I think a lot of it it sort of boils down to, I'm going to just use like the word self-confidence, which could be related to a million different things. So hard to answer that question very specifically, but I think people just have self-doubts about their skills. I find this in classes all the time, that people worry that it's not going to look good. You get 20 people in a class, and I think all 20 are often thinking, oh, 19 other people are going to make better work than mine. Mine's not as good as the instructor. What if I fail? So all these sort of worries about just your skill and your ability. And very often, I think that comes from an early experience, sometimes very art-related, like when you're in grade school and you draw the sun and you draw blue, and the teacher yells at you and says, you can't draw the sun blue. Or, you're drawing when you're a kid and some stooge tells you that you're not good. And those words just eat at us, I think. And even if it's buried, it's still there. So I just think it's a matter of that confidence. And one of the reasons why I love journaling is because, to me, the privacy aspect means that, if the page doesn't look so good, you're the only person who's going to know, and you're going to have the privacy to then work on it more and maybe make it more to your liking. In this class, and I'm sure there are people, I have to assume there are people who are making pages who aren't showing them. And that's totally 100% fine and valid and perfect. So I would just try to push through. And I think a lot of the ways that I create are to help people deal with those sort of negative voices. Because when you go fast, when you don't think, when you sort of give it up to the art rather than to your skill and just do what the layer tells you, you really can get lost in there. And hopefully break through.
Right. Good answer. And actually, you sort of answered Eliza's question. She says, do you ever find that your work is so personal that it's harder to show people than a non-mixed media sketchbook? I don't know if you do any sketchbooks, but yeah.
I definitely have pieces I've never shown people.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I have. So I walk you through journals in the class, but I also have journals at home that I'm not going to show on video.
They're for
I
you.
think sometimes,
yeah.
So yes, and I don't think I've ever made art too personal. I have had some very personal art, and what I actually have found is that the art that's the most personal is actually, it's a weird word to use, but maybe the most popular. And I just mean by comments that I get or quickness that art sells, people just resonate with that. And I think that just given what I do and, that I'm so social media focused, I have just become much more comfortable sort of exposing some of that and not, worrying too much about how it's perceived. That being said, I'm human. So sometimes I put out the art out there that's personal and I think, maybe I shouldn't have done that,
But it's so authentic, and that's what people see, and that's why they resonate with it.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. I think you need to take risks as an artist, and you put yourself out there, and not everyone's going to like your work, and I'm okay with that because I don't like everybody's work. I mean, I go to an art show and I walk by booths because it's just not my style or my preference. That doesn't mean it's not good.
Of course, yeah.
And so. I mean, in general, the community online is very supportive. So putting something personal out there, usually, if anything, it actually brings support, so the fear of that goes away when you see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's totally fine not to share.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's up to,
Yep.
it's totally up to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Anat, I think I have to pronounce it that way, asks, can you elaborate more about the relation of mixed media to emotion?
Sure. I think that, I'm biased because I'm a mixed media artist, but I think that mixed media just is one of the most free approaches to art. I also think it's very accessible. I think anybody can just start. And I think because of the freedom that it allows, both in terms of how you approach it, in terms of the supplies you use, and in terms of like the layers and the way in which you actually do it, that it lends itself to emotion, because you can, choose something really rough or something really dark in a way that is as simple as pulling out a piece of paper, as opposed to creating that, say, with a pencil. It's just, because the thought is minimized, it just allows you to go in there and grab what you need and access the emotion quickly and just let it out. When I make books, or, I don't sketch as much as I used to, but when I sketch, or people who make quilts, you have to focus so much on doing it accurately.
Yeah.
It takes you out of the emotion. It takes you to a different part of your brain. It takes you to the part of your brain that's quantifying. And for me, I'm not, I've never become so adept at sketching that it ever feels really fully natural. So, and maybe I haven't had this discussion before. Maybe people are always thinking when you're sketching. I assume not, but so for me, I can't go emotional, because I'm just focused on, am I getting that right? Like, it's the negative space, is it working? Oh no, I'm using a pen. Uh-oh, that kind of thing. Whereas mixed media, it's just it's like just putting it out there on the page.
It's true. Yeah. To me, there is definitely an element of meditation to sketching, to drawing from observation. But it's true. You are focusing on the technique and focusing on how to put something on the paper, and is it actually representing what I want it to be, and letting all that go is the wonderful thing about mixed media. Like,
yes.
Because you are just following your feeling or your emotion, choosing the colors, choosing whatever is next that you put in there. So
like for those of you who, I'm assuming you're all in the class, if you're here, maybe you've seen all my videos or not. And if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to say much, but toward the end of the page, I just took that black crayon and just, and that was just so emotional and so freeing. And if I were sketching, I could do that too, I suppose, certainly. But for me, the mixed media just lends itself to doing something like that without hesitation or without fear. And part of that is probably my practice.
Yes.
Just that I've done it so long, I feel comfortable doing that.
Yes.
So that's important to note too.
Yeah, and that makes me think about the process as well. Like, you can also think like, oh, I'm going in with this crayon and I might actually mess up the page that I've been building up. And
right.
But then again, you're like, well, if you don't like it, you just cover it again and you just work a little bit more on it. So
correct.
Yeah, it's never done. And I think when you work in a sketchbook, especially drawing from observation, you need to just, go with that wonky line and like work with it. So it's totally different. Yeah. Let's see. Oh yes, here's a question about brushes. Esther is asking. So in the videos, you say you don't clean your brushes to avoid them getting wet because you work with dry brushes. But then my brushes get all stiff and caked together. So.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I need to clarify that. I've had some people actually email me or message me about that.
Oh, really?
So I mainly only use the chip brushes, those cheap brushes, because the bristles just are so irregular and they make these beautiful wonky and lines with all these gaps. And I paint dry. because when you paint wet, paint does what it's supposed to do, and it spreads out and covers the paper, and I don't like full coverage. That being said, when let's say I'm using blues, light blues, and I'm usually okay with then if I take greens to leave the light blue paint on, but sometimes I do want it a little purer, and so I will put the brush in water in between, and I'll just pull it out, and then I'll just wipe it with a paper towel.
Right.
So it's more dry. So eventually I do. That's an important clarification. I mean, when I'm done with the session,
then you clean it.
often,
Yeah.
then I put it in the water bottle, because you're right. Once you if you took that literally,
Yeah.
and I can see why you would never be able to use the brush again. It
No,
would just
then
be
you
caked and hard.
Yeah, you just start
So,
out
yeah,
with a new brush every session. That will
every
be
time.
yeah.
And, they're pretty cheap, but you don't want to go overboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just dry them.
Yeah.
If I once take them out of the water container and just dry them.
Glad that's clarified. Good.
Yeah. And sorry if you ruined some brushes on my account.
I'm sure she has been cleaning. I don't know. We'll see. So this is Christina asking, what adhesive do you use to glue found objects to your wood panels?
I use two different glues. My favorite glue is called Liquid Fusion. Liquid Fusion is like another glue that people are more familiar with, which is E6000.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like E6000. Sorry, E6000 people. I think it's very toxic. It smells really bad. It's got the strings. I've never used a glue gun, but I know with glue guns you get those strings of glue. I believe that E6000 has actually come out with a new updated version which doesn't have the strings. But that being said, so what I experimented with, and I found this glue called Liquid Fusion, and it's, as glues go, it's relatively non-toxic. I mean, all glue is toxic. You're not going to eat glue, please.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have too much scent. It dries clear, and it does dry a little shiny like most glues, which is trouble. But the great property of it is that if, let's say, you put too much glue on and it splodges out, which nothing destroys the mystery of a assemblage piece than glue spots. If you just wait till it dries, then it's removable by friction. So you can go in there with your finger or the tip of an awl, and you can actually rub out and rub away the glue, which is great. It's not immediately, it doesn't dry immediately, so it gives you some time to move around. The other glue I use is called Loctite, which is Loctite. Loctite is a glue that you get in the hardware store, and it is quite toxic. So I use it sparingly. It comes in different forms. I use the gel form. It has a nozzle, a very thin nozzle, so you can get it into small places, which is often where I use it. It does smell a little bit, but it dries instantly. It's like a less than 10-second drying time. It's like a crazy glue, so you can definitely glue your fingers together, so be cautious. The way I use that when I have something that has almost no surface. So if I have a very thin embellishment that I need to add, and I don't want to stand there for 10 minutes holding it, the Loctite would work perfectly. So I don't use it for my whole pieces, but I use it where I need to.
That is a very good answer, and I typed up those names for those
Thank
glues.
you.
So, quick question from Anne: have you worked on cardboard?
Cardboard.
Well, you sometimes glue paper on cardboard.
Yeah.
That's what you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say mostly I don't. I prefer working on watercolor paper. Sometimes I have worked on bookboard, which, directly on the bookboard. The bookboard, to me, is thicker than what I think of traditional cardboard. There's no reason not to work on cardboard at all. Mm-hmm. It would absolutely work fine. You're going to have the warping, but you're going to have the warping with any paper. So I haven't much, maybe at all. But yeah, there's no reason not to. I know some people like tear up cereal boxes and work on those, and really anything goes. There's almost nothing you can say. I'm going to say almost, but almost nothing you can say that you can't do with mixed media.
Excellent. Love
Yeah.
that. Okay, we're almost running out of time, and I think we have covered almost all the questions. Here's a fun one. A thank
Okay.
you from Deb. She says, Seth, working with you has enabled me to let go and work on pieces a bit at a time. So if I don't finish a piece all in one session, I'm stressing out much less.
Okay.
Excellent.
Excellent.
That's great, Deb.
Let me add, because I wrote this in a comment in the schoolyard. You know, I did that journal spread for the video. So, you know, naturally I started it and I finished it because it's a video.
Mm-hmm.
I never, ever finish a journal page in one setting. I mean, never.
Right.
Mainly because I just love layers, and I go back and I keep going back. For me, a journal page, someone else asked this, I think, in the schoolyard. It is a moment in time, but I'm very comfortable, like as I flip through my journal, if I have my pen, I'll add to a page from an earlier day. I don't care if it sort of bleeds into another moment in my life. The journal is my journal. The way I look at it is it's the journal for that period of time, which might be a few months. It might take me a year to get through a journal. I totally lost track where I'm going with this, but
about not stressing out and being okay with not doing it in one session. Yeah.
Yeah. And I never make an art piece in one session. I don't know how I could.
Okay, then I actually have an interesting question that maybe you can't even answer, but Francine says, when you get to the make or break point in a piece, I don't exactly know what that means, but and then you pause, what motivates you to move forward? Is that actually part of your process, a make or break point?
I guess there are times where I have to go. I need to make a choice and move in a certain direction. Maybe let's say I've done a background and I'm at a point where, okay, now I'm done with the background. Like, what do I do next? Which a lot of people have a hard time. Lots of people are very free at making backgrounds and struggle after that. So for me, that is often a breaking point. That's a time when I do step away. And because I'm working on multiple pages at a time, and I'm also working in multiple artwork at a time, I then go back at the point where I'm ready for it. So, you know, maybe, you know, I have my journal and I'm just flipping through it, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my, yeah, I never really worked more on that page. Oh, now I see I can do this.
Right.
So stepping away is good for me. And it's usually the inspiration doesn't come from like, oh, I'm ready to work on that piece, or, oh, I want to get back to my journal. Usually the inspiration is I look there and all of a sudden I notice something in the layer that maybe I didn't notice when I was working in it because I was so close to it. And then I'm off. As soon as I say, oh, there's that line there, let me cross that line. And then I'm in the zone and I'm gone. So that's what I would do with those make or break points.
Right. Step away, come back to it, and there will always be something new. Yeah. Fantastic. I think we covered all the questions. I mean, there were some questions there that we already covered earlier, so I hope everybody's happy, and otherwise we will just, you know, keep on chatting in the schoolyard, because that's where all the action happens and everybody's is posting their homework. There's just one thing to do before we leave this call. It's this. I'll bring it up into the view again. It's Seth's prize. It's the book signed by Seth and a set of stamps, which look amazing. And Morgan has sent me a name. She pulled a name out of the hat, and she will contact the winner for the address. Yes, drum roll, please. The winner is, let's see, Tracy Nadal. Woo-hoo. Tracy, congratulations. Tracy. You are the lucky winner. I'm a little bit jealous, actually. But, you will get your prize sent to you as soon as we have your address. So Congrats.
Nice.
Seth, I hope you have a fantastic time in Florida teaching this weekend.
Thank you. Should be fun.
Yes.
Can I say one more thing?
I was going to ask, like, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to let you guys all watching know that you're in for some amazingness with Natalie and with Keisha.
Oh, yeah.
All four of us, we're actually all really good friends, and we know each other's styles and processes well. And I haven't seen their videos, so I'll see them when you see them.
They're
so I don't quite
amazing.
know what I can only imagine, but they're both incredible. And the crazy thing, or maybe not so crazy, but all four of us, while there's so much overlap, we're really all so different. And so, you know, after these 2 weeks, it feels like this is so full already. So much more is coming at you.
Yeah, we're just
that
halfway.
You just can't even imagine all the other stuff you're going to learn. It's really amazing. Yeah.
Love it. Yes, I love it that you are looking forward to it too. So am I.
am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, thank you so much for all your wisdom, all your answers, because there were a lot of questions. And
Sure.
well, we'll see each other in class again.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll see you online later today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have
Thank you
a
all.
great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye.